Hi y'all, and welcome back to my channel. And today is a video we are doing inspired by a video that the ever so lovely, the ever so fantabulous, the ever so comedic Teresa is Dead has been doing. And that is talking about your favorite basic, insert expletive right here, palettes. For a myriad of reasons, we do not swear on this channel, but I assume y'all can infer what that word may be. If you haven't seen her videos talk about these, they're absolutely fantastic. I will leave her channel and her videos linked down below. I am going to take my video just a little bit differently than how she does. With her, she's basically talking about all those basic, boring, neutral, everyday, run-of-the-mill, continuously shilled, continuously pushed out palettes that we really love. Y'all know that your girl is a lover of non-traditional, non-conventional, non-natural colors. I love my green, I love my red, I love my pink, blue, purple, puce. I enjoy a full spectrum of varying color to apply to my face. Today we are obviously living the monochromatic orangey ready moment. But the one difference I'm gonna do, I'm gonna be talking about some boring, basic, whatever shiz going on here, but I'm also gonna be talking about some basic B palettes that I love that have become palettes that I feel, even if they're not completely neutral, they're kind of just staples and palettes that everyone has no matter who you are or what your aesthetic is. Which I think in a certain way does infer the basicness to them aside from the color story. I could be wrong, let me know. But we're gonna start off with one that it is a very surprising one for its neutrality, although the neutrals kind of skew in my wheelhouse, as it were. It's more the company that's an issue, and that is the Morphe Jaclyn Hill palette. I honestly have no idea why I bought this shiz. I have never had an affinity for Jaclyn Hill. Just, you know, she was never one of the people that I grew up watching. I mean, I do know why I bought this. I bought it because I knew it would be a review that would get me the views. And the palette, while very basic, is very beautiful. It skews, you got a lot of nice warm tone collections. I probably could have done a look similar to what I did today with this palette. Then you got the cool tones going on here, and then you've got the little quad here of the exciting non-neutral colors. But I feel this palette on a whole definitely skews a bit more basic, a bit more safe. It's definitely a palette that a lot of people have because Jaclyn Hill, lots of people love her. A lot of influencers and a lot of YouTubers really ascribe to the Morphe formula. Not me. If all their eyeshadows were this formula, I might give them a little bit of a pass. But 9 times out of 10, this is not their formula, and we've learned that even this formula has changed. I got this on the first run. But every time I use this palette, I'm reminded how much I love it, and I get a little bit spiteful feeling because I'm like, you're a Morphe product. You need to suck so you can validate all of my internal anger towards the company. The shimmers are absolutely beautiful, a little bit thicker, but they do pack a lot of punch. The mattes, smooth, blendable. I adore the color selection, as basic as it is. You got those and that shimmer right there. Mwah. So for all of its basicness and all of its Morphe-ness and all of its Jaclyn Hill-ness, this is definitely one that stood out to me as a basic B palette that I really love and enjoy. I would even go as far to say I recommend it for the price point, but considering that whole like formulation change, not sure how I feel about that. Definitely go watch Jen Love's Reviews video comparing the two formulas. It is an eye-opener. This next palette is one that I have not had for a very long time. I've recently reviewed it. I will leave that down below if I can remember. 9 times out of 10 I don't. I apologize for that. There's a little bit of mental disconnect from filming to editing to fixing the description box and all that jazz. But the Natasha Denona Bronze palette, which is probably the epitome of a basic palette, although it does not have a collection of soft ecru, eggshell, taupe setting shades, which I do appreciate. Y'all would have seen in my review, y'all would have seen in one of my monthly hits and misses, ya girl loves the shiz out of it. Are the colors nothing I would typically buy? Yeah! Is the matte to shimmer ratio abysmally in favor of the shimmers? Yeah. But is it an absolutely beautifully, fantastically formulated palette? Yes, it is. This shiz goes on beyond the call of duty when it comes to shimmers. They are some of the best shimmers I have ever used in my life. If all of her shimmers were like this, I would die a happy camper. The quality and the beauty, you know, I mean, the color story is boring. It's basic. You're basically getting the same whateverness every time you use this, but it is just such a pleasure, a privilege to work with. This is the kind of shimmers, if I'm gonna have a palette that is like, you know, 80% shimmers, I want them to be formulated like this, which they are, so that makes me all kinds of happy. But this is definitely, I consider like Natasha Denona, even for its price point, it's a very basic B sort of brand, because it's just like everyone's all like, I'm an influencer and I have Natasha Denona. You know, there are just certain brands and whatevers that lend themselves to be kind of just basic whatever all over. In all honesty, I find Too Faced to be a basic B brand, but that is just me personally. But it's heckin' basic, it's heckin' shimmerful, and I heckin' love it. The next two palettes sort of go hand in hand, and all one may not be the most basic, not skewing the most neutral, I still feel it fits the bill, because at the time of release, yeah, it was all kinds of inventive whatever, and people were shooketh, and the game was never the same again. But now, in 2020, this is kind of par for the course. I feel like the evolution of neutral and what is considered acceptable in an everyday environment has shifted a little bit. We're not so much naked palettes straight up, and we're a little bit more, you know, modern renaissance, which has a good amount of neutrals going on in it, but it also has the delicious pinky reds and those orange tones. This is not necessarily the epitome of a basic palette, but it is definitely one that is considered a safe staple for people who want to do softer looks. You have options in here for people who want to do deeper looks. If you want to get a little bit more adventurous, this is a palette that sort of hits all of those avenues. And so I feel in that this palette has shifted from like something that crazy, adventurous, red wearing eyeshadow people purchase to something that is now considered much more basic and not as revolutionary or out of the box. I feel in where we've come, we've gotten a lot more accustomed to wearing different, more interesting red tones on our eyes, and it's become more acceptable, more of a thing, more mainstream. And for the longest time, Modern Renaissance was the palette that everyone had to have, that a lot of people still have. Y'all know this is one of my top 10 favorite palettes right here. I love the shiz out of this thing. And I love it for the red tones as well as the neutrality and the way that they all work together in such a beautiful way. It's only got 2 shimmers, so that don't hurt, but this is a palette that I love. I would honestly recommend this to anyone. I'm like, yeah, don't be afraid of the red tones. I mean, red tones are the new neutral anyway. But then if we're going, you know, basic without red tones, soft glam. Boom. This shiz skews a lot safer in the color department, although we have the black, so we're getting a little deep, getting a little dark, getting a little decadent and alternative. Even though I actually find that a lot of other YouTubers and a lot of other alternative people use a lot more black in their looks than I do for considering my aesthetic. But this is just an absolutely stunning, basic, everyday, any occasion sort of palette. This is a palette that I tend to reach for when I don't know what I want to do. I'm not feeling a certain monochromatic way, but I want something that I know is going to turn out well. So we come to Old Reliable. And I know that a lot of people, when this palette released, I just about lost my mind. I do believe that this palette is the true sister to the modern Renaissance right here, not the subculture. They play beyond beautifully together. They're on the same level. But I know that some people, when this was released, were like, yeah, it's kind of a boring, same, repetitive. It's got that setting shade, although this is fantastic for setting whatever kind of eye primer you're using. You know, it's got some of the shades in modern Renaissance. We've seen this before. It's supposed to be like a bridal palette, but y'all, for all the basicness that this palette may hold, I love absolutely every single inch, every single ounce of this thing because it is so safe, not just in, excuse me, burp squad. Not just in color theory, but in formulation. It's a palette that has never done me wrong. One of my favorite end-all be-all neutral situations, because y'all know your girl doesn't skew. The brown, taupe, the mahogany, the ecru, the taupe, you know, it's just kind of not my thing. But this one, I absolutely love. Two more palettes from the same company, not Anastasia, the same company here. Milk Cosmetics, typically a company that tends to do a bit more alternative, editorial sort of makeup, but you know, they themselves are not against releasing a very basic palette, something we've seen before, as seen in the Rust and the 27 palette. Now, the 27 palette came out after the Gemini. Everyone was all astounded by the audacity Milk Cosmetics had to put a mustard and a green together in a palette. I was all here for it. I am here for it. And then they were like, hey, let's release some brown ready tones, because we hadn't seen that before, at least not from them. So I guess that justifies the release in and of itself. Y'all know when Milk Cosmetics does its formulations right, I absolutely love them. They're mattes, heckin' pigmented, heckin' powdery, not a beginner formula, but absolutely beautiful. Shimmers, ka-cha-cha-cha-cha. We have the Rust palette, probably another one of my favorite neutral palettes, you know? Is it anything like crazy out of the ordinary? I mean, we've got kind of that yellowy situation going on over here, but when you move on over into the right over here, basic? We're not really breaking the game with more. I mean, there's only so much you can do with any color, but there is only so much variation you can create with brown, you know, and I like to think this one does it pretty well. Y'all know I absolutely love this palette. Once again, one of my favorite neutral palettes that have sort of given me a love for, you know, things that don't necessarily skew green, blue, or purple. I've also learned that going more neutral can tend to make my beautiful little peepers pop more than a complete green look. But yeah, they were neutral, they were simple, they were probably things that we'd seen before, but I love the formula, and I knew I would get a lot of use out of these. Your girl is fairly invested when it comes to neutrals in getting them from brands that I know I love the formula on, rather than trying it on a new brand that's like, hey, we're establishing ourselves, here's a bunch of neutrals. Then a brand that I don't really own a lot from. I enjoy what I do own from them, but Dominique Cosmetics Latte palette. Teresa actually talked about this in her second installment of the Basic B palettes videos. You know, it's basic. It may be a little bit less basic because it's got that little shot of purple and that little shot of blue, although I find that to be maybe just a little bit more conducive to being basic than if it were just straight up neutrals, because how many times have we seen brands that come out with, oh, it's a neutral palette, but we're gonna excite people because it's gonna have a pop of a color that y'all haven't seen in a while, so that's gonna give this neutral palette that edge factor, that niftiness, because you're gonna zero in on that shade and be like, wow, I have never seen a neutral palette with these pops of color before. I need it. But with that being said, I think that the Dominique Cosmetics formula is very underrated. I really enjoy this palette. I've pulled it into a couple different previous rotations amidst my shop my stash over the years, my attempts and my fails and my successes. I absolutely love the row of top mattes. I mean, Vanilla Cream, it's kind of like a yellowy, you know, sickly, sallowly yellow setting shade. The shimmers are very beautiful. I absolutely adore Espresso and then Macchiato. These two right here, you know, is basic with two pretty colors. Did I need to buy it? No. Did I have these shades? Probably. Could I get the same look maybe without the purple and the blue from the Jaclyn Hill palette? Yeah. Do I have it, still use it, and enjoy it? Definitely. Now, it's really funny because, like I said sort of in the beginning, when I think of a basic company, I think of Too Faced for all their frills and their frivolous packaging and their presentation. Their products skew very basic, you know? Like, for all the fanciness and the fantasticalness, the stuff inside is kind of just wah-wah. And y'all probably may know, during my eyeshadow declutter, I decluttered all but one of my Too Faced palettes, and that is the Too Faced Peachy, Just Peachy Mattes, which, at the time, was maybe a little bit revolutionary. I mean, this was post modern Renaissance. They kind of broke the whateverness. The Too Faced earth-shattering moment was the Sweet Peach palette, and this came after it. You know, it is a basic, ready, pinky, mostly neutral, kind of peachy, all matte palette with two freakishly similar setting shades. At the time, I thought this was the end-all be-all shiznit. I still really, really enjoy it. This is one of the best formulas Too Faced has ever produced in their entire career. But looking at it, you're just like, okay, all right. At the time, yeah, sure. It was kind of nifty. It was kind of groundbreaking, but not really. But at the same time, I love this thing. I adore, basically, honestly, just take out those two stupid setting shades and I love the absolute rest of this palette. It's absolutely beautiful. One of the most cohesive, one of the most beautiful gradient things Too Faced has ever done. This is a palette that became a tried and true and really rose to the top amidst all the other just cluttery and disjointed Too Faced palettes, although it may be basic in the same way that the modern Renaissance has become, whereas we aren't in shock and awe over ready tone-based neutrals. It's still a really pretty and solid palette, and one that I would recommend from Too Faced, which I would recommend others. This is the one that I decided to keep because I knew I would get use out of it. Then last but not least, we have a sort of a palette that's less basic in color story, though once again sort of like modern Renaissance and the peachy mattes. In today's climate, this is probably a palette that would be considered more neutral, but it's more the fact that it was a palette that everybody had to have and everybody loved it, and it was the palette to have. The Huda Beauty modern rose gold palette. Mine is the Remastered, but I'm sure we can all remember the horrible, flimsy, tacky packaging of the first incarnation. You know, we got them rosy tones, and we got a lot of neutrals with a black. I am wearing this and a mixture of the Desert Dusk on my peepers today. You know, it's kind of that same thing where it's like at the time, people were like, oh, F me up. There are two rosy ready shades up in that shiz. We are just shaking it up. The game has been shattered. We are in the Matrix. Whereas you look at it now and you're like, wow, this is pretty tame. This is basically what neutral has become, or at least sort of what passes as neutral these days. Like I said, we've become a little bit less strict. We're a bit more loose about our interpretation of a neutral palette. I bought this as well as the Desert Dusk one, and I wanted to tear these palettes a new one. I was like, Huda Beauty, it's overpriced and it's bougie and it's gonna be awful. And I do absolutely love this one as well as the Desert Dusk one as well as the new Nudes one. These are actually pulled into a rotation and I have been absolutely enjoying them. I find that Huda Beauty is also kind of like a basic B sort of brand where it's like, Huda Beauty. Sort of taking over that slot where like Lorac or Urban Decay used to be. It's sort of like, you know, what does everyone have? Everyone has Huda Beauty. And despite all of that and the fact that I don't really purchase too much from her anymore, and for all of its basicness, I still do really love this palette. I lied, we're gonna be doing one more, and this, once again, the color story at a time may have been something that was more crazy, out there, unthought of, unheard of, but it's also kind of just the palette in and of itself as well as the palette's whole family, and that is Naked Heat. Only Naked palette I still own. You know, at the time, this was very skewing Naked. Maybe we were being a little bit more edgy with the whole like, oh, we've got some radiance and some orangey tones and some like rust tones. We're honestly looking at it now compared to other palettes that skew in this color family. This is pretty basic comparatively. And I feel like the epitome of basic are the Urban Decay neutral palettes. We're just the Urban Decay Naked palettes on a whole. You know, even that purple one where they're like, oh, we're gonna give you 4 purples and the rest are neutrals. And I'm like, basic? You couldn't have just gone full ham on the purple? Probably the least basic is the Naked Cherry one. I decluttered that one because I have other tones that I like more. But looking at this one, you're just like, wow. Like even looking at it now, I'm like, I could probably get this shiz from a couple other palettes that I have, but I enjoy this palette. This is probably one of the superior Urban Decay formulas that I've tried. I think they are a brand that's kind of fallen away from what it used to be, but the reason I kept this one is because I enjoyed using it. The mattes were very soft. They blended nicely. I absolutely loved these 2 shimmers right here. And so this palette, even for all of its basicness and the fact that the color story isn't anything revolutionary, even though it kind of pushes boundaries, although, you know, to me, as red and orange as this may skew, this is super neutral. This is like as neutral as I would go. But it is the only Urban Decay palette that made it through the declutter. Probably the most nostalgic for me and probably the best one I've ever used. Alright, there we have an end to that video. As always, I would love to hear what y'all have to say about the palettes I talked about. I understand relative is as relative does. Not everyone is going to have the same interpretation of what neutral is. So if you want to go down, you want to trash talk me and be like, well, these palettes weren't actually really neutral and you're colorblind. I mean, you can do you, boo-boo, but it's just, you know, can we be nice about it? Love to hear your thoughts on the palettes I talked about, as well as a palette that you love that is basic AF. But thank you guys so much for watching. I love you, and as always, keep it real. Mwah!